And just let me know when you're ready and I'll start the clock. Ready? Okay, here we go.
In February 2014, a Western localization of the first Danganronpa game was published by NIS America on the PlayStation Vita, known as Danganronpa Trigger Happy Havoc. In this presentation, I will consider how the creative design principles and aspects of this game have been implemented, the efficacy of these, and discuss any potential improvements. For the uninitiated, I'll give a quick summary of Danganronpa's basic genre and premise. It's a visual novel murder mystery game taking elements of dating simulators and shooters. The player takes control of the protagonist, Makoto Naegi, as he enrolls at Hope's Peak Academy. However, he and 14 other students are locked inside by an animatronic bear called Monokuma and told that they can only leave if they anonymously kill another student. Following a murder, the player is thrown into a class trial, where they will debate with the other students to determine who the blackened is. Depending on what section of the game the player has reached, the core mechanics differ. This style of gameplay can be split into 5 different modes: basic story progression, free time events, investigations, class trials, and the school mode. Due to time constraints with this particular presentation, I'm going to focus on the first 4 modes, as these were present in the original game, and maintain fairly consistent mechanics and rules throughout. That being said, I will refer back to school mode where relevant. These 4 key modes span across 6 chapters, following the same rise and fall conflict structure throughout. The chapter begins with expository dialogue, Monokuma providing a motive to murder, a character death and subsequent class trial, the blackened being found and executed, and a retrospective conclusion. This formula can be applied to each chapter. This narrative structure is flawed when considering Chikmensukai's theory of flow, in which the challenge of a game must accommodate the rising skill level of the player. Due to lull periods between each class trial, the sections which require the most player skill, an issue may arise where boredom ensues due to a lack of player interactivity. Of course, this is assuming that all player experiences are the same, which is naturally untrue. Depending on the player's preference and goals, they may not wish to experience the game as a challenge, but as a narrative. The core mechanic of this game is pressing a single button to progress dialogue, with supplementary mechanics of differing dialogue options and being able to interact with surroundings. Through such interactions, monocoins can be accumulated and exchanged for items to use in the free time events. Placing monocoins within interactable objects emphasizes exploration, incentivizing player interaction with their surroundings. Despite this game's structure being linear, there is a bad ending which can be reached if the player chooses certain dialogue options in the 5th class trial. Compared to other visual novels, however, this alternate ending offers minimal replay value. For example, one of 9 Hours, 9 Persons, 9 Doors' main selling points is how each story branch ties into the next, broadening the narrative. The developers of Danganronpa could expand upon this by implementing more player interaction within the plot itself, with certain dialogue choices impacting the narrative outcome, giving replay value through alternate paths. Considering Shell's elemental tetrad schema, Danganronpa fits this well, with aesthetics at the forefront, mechanics and story underlying it, and technology hidden in the background. Each one is just as important as the next, and taking out any would leave the game unrecognizable. Without a story, Danganronpa would be nothing, but without mechanics, the player may as well pick up a book. Another mode within Danganronpa are the free time events. At set intervals throughout the story, the player can interact with characters of their choice. Upon initiation, the procedures taken by the player involve giving the character an item of varying affection value dependent on the character. Presenting a low value item will cause the termination of the free time session, requiring the player to determine the best item for the specific character. Upon completion, the player will receive a bonus ability which can be later used in the class trials. This gives incentive for the player to interact with the cast beyond just narrative related reasons, as they will have an easier time in the later trials. An interesting correlation can be seen with each character's free time availability and the chapter in which they perish. For example, Sayaka Mizuno, the first victim, has the least number of free time events, whereas someone like Yasuhiro Hagakure has significantly more. Though useful due to an increased likelihood that the player won't miss any free time events within a playthrough, it can be detrimental if this pattern is identified earlier on, suggesting a character with fewer free time events will perish sooner. Furthermore, characters who die prematurely could be missed if a player unknowingly focuses on one of the characters with more free time events early on. However, it appears the developers took note of this, as the first few instances of free time availability have characters who die earliest placed into the player's spawn point, indirectly controlling them to be more likely to interact with these characters first. Still, some characters get more development due to more free time availability and more opportunities for interaction. Interestingly, in the sequel, Danganronpa 2, Goodbye Despair, the developers made it so the cast have an equal number of free time events. Though resolving some issues present in the first game, the characters who perish first had no chance for free time completion prior to the post-game content, an issue the first game was void of. To remedy incomplete free time events, the PlayStation Vita port of Danganronpa allowed unconstrained completion of free time events in the school mode, the post-game content. Now, as I've insinuated, murder occurs pretty regularly in this game, bringing me on to the next mode, investigations. The core mechanic of this mode sees the player moving a reciprocal around the screen in order to interact with objects, later used in the class trials. The player can press triangle to bring up blue indicators highlighting interactable objects, ensuring the player doesn't miss content. This part of the game is rigid across playthroughs, causing potential monotony for returning players. Following the completion of the investigations, the player will enter the class trial. Within a class trial, the main objective is for the player to find the blackened through a system of mini-games, with non-stop debates being the most relevant. These take shooter elements and apply them to debates. As characters talk, their speech appears on screen, with certain words and phrases in yellow. The player uses evidence gained in the investigation to press these points. However, these words and phrases are not static and must be aimed at with precision to continue. Jules' considerations of failure can be seen through the repercussions of shooting the wrong quote with the wrong evidence, resulting in an energy-based punishment. If the player does this too much, their health bar will deplete until it is nil, setting them back in the trial, costing the player their time and energy. Due to this, the player's incentive should be to use mental skills to work out where the contradictions in the various characters' statements lie. One issue with the class trials is the rigid formatting of them. Once the player knows the answers, that's kind of it. This minimizes replay value beyond the enjoyment of the story. Interestingly, Danganronpa V3, a later entry in the series, remedied this by adding backroutes. These are alternate answers to the non-stop debates, giving more opportunities for player autonomy, increasing replay value. One of the major issues Danganronpa faces is the lack of consequence to losing. Falstein discusses how, though a flow channel requires a positive monotonic curve to avoid frustration and boredom, a completely straight flow channel will result in an uninteresting play session. Danganronpa maintains flow via a steady increasing class trial difficulty, the first containing fewer options at the player's behest, and these values increasing as the game progresses. With these values increasing, however, due to a lack of consequence to player error beyond a lack of story progression, the player may find themselves randomly guessing options until they win, causing player interaction to plummet. Bergen's classification of a game would see Danganronpa falling under the mantle of puzzle, a product with a system and solution. With its linear structure, there's no way to really strategize or contemplate a different route through the game. However, it is worth noting that Bergen's focus on the formative structure of strategy games ill-suited to the narrative structure Danganronpa possesses. Danganronpa more closely follows Fullerton's game identification theories, players completing objectives to achieve an outcome. The game's formal elements of structure dictate the way in which the meaning can be derived from the dramatic elements. However, Danganronpa can be fundamentally changed to match Bergen's definition of the game through the randomization of solutions. Think Cluedo, in which the killer, murder weapon, and location are changed every time. Though this would give the game more replay value, this less rigid narrative structure may hinder character development. Since its initial release, Danganronpa has grown exponentially. Considering Salin and Zimmerman's rules of play, the culture of Danganronpa has blossomed into a behemoth franchise. Due to this, later games in the series have already made improvements I've mentioned throughout this presentation. What Danganronpa does well is the balance between gameplay and narrative, combining both the formal elements of the system with the dynamic to create an enriching experience for the player, though it does suffer from a rigid structure, preventing much divergence from the set boundaries laid out by the developers. Despite this, I feel this structure works for Danganronpa due to its emphasis on story-based gameplay. I'd like to thank you all for listening, and here's a list of my resources if anyone would like any further reading. I don't know if we have time for any questions.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions? Quick questions? Okay, let's keep moving then.